Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're cracking the code on the AZ305, the Azure Solutions Architect Expert Exam. But here's the thing, we're not going to treat this as just some test. Nope, we're going to look at it as a blueprint for how to think, design, and build like a truly world-class cloud architect. All right, let's jump right in. Okay, right off the bat, this is probably the single most important thing to get your head around. The AZ305 is not about memorizing where every button is in the Azure portal. It is all about the why. Why are you choosing this service over that one? How do you take what the business needs, things like cost, security, performance, and turn that into a real technical design? As an architect, your most important skill is being able to understand and then justify the trade-offs you're making. So here's our game plan for today. First up, we're going to get into the right mindset for an architect. Then we'll break down the exam itself, using it as our blueprint. From there, we'll do a deep dive into the three huge pillars of design: identity, infrastructure, and of course, business continuity. And we'll wrap it all up with a real concrete plan to help you get to mastery. So what does it really mean to be a solutions architect? Well, you're basically the bridge between the business world and the tech world. You're the one who advises the stakeholders. You take their requirements, all their security rules, their performance goals, their budget limits, and you translate all of that into a cloud solution that actually works and makes sense. Okay, let's use the exam itself as our guide, right? Because if we really understand how it's structured, we'll know exactly where to put our energy. Let's break down what Microsoft thinks are the absolute most essential skills for any cloud architect. So this chart, man, it tells you everything you need to know about where to focus. Designing infrastructure solutions takes the biggest slice of the pie, sitting around 32%. But check this out. Identity and governance is right behind it at 28%. What that tells you is that building the foundation and all its rules is just as critical as building the actual house. After that, you got data storage and business continuity rounding out the core. All right, a quick but super important point on logistics. You can technically take the AZ305 exam whenever you want, but you won't actually get that official Azure Solutions Architect Expert title unless you've also passed the AZ104, the Administrator certification. I always think of it this way. The AZ104 proves you know how to build stuff. The AZ305 proves you know what to build and why. Okay, let's dive into our first pillar, identity and governance. And look, there's a really good reason we're starting here. Before you spin up a single VM, before you write one line of code, you have to have a rock-solid foundation. This is all about figuring out who can do what, setting the rules of the road, and making sure your environment is totally secure and manageable right from day one. This slide right here, this is a perfect example of a fundamental governance principle in action. By splitting out your subscriptions for production, staging, and development, you're creating these incredibly powerful boundaries. And it's not just for keeping things tidy. It gives you cost isolation so you know exactly what your dev environment costs. It creates security boundaries so a mistaken dev can't possibly bring down production. And it gives you crystal clear accountability. And all of this naturally leads us to a really big concept, the Azure landing zone. Now, a landing zone isn't a single thing you click on. Think of it more like a pre-configured, well-architected foundation that has all your networking, your identity, your policies all baked in. It's the blueprint that ensures every new application you build automatically inherits all the right security and governance rules. It's what makes everything consistent and lets you scale. Okay, our foundation is set. Now let's get to the building blocks. Pillar 2 is all about infrastructure and data services. This is where you're going to spend a ton of your time as an architect, making those critical design decisions and, picking the right tool for the right job from Azure's absolutely massive portfolio of services. So here's a classic architect's dilemma, something the AZ305 will definitely throw at you. Your app needs a database, so what do? Do you go with a traditional, structured relational database, or do you pick a flexible, non-relational, NoSQL database? And the answer, of course, is it depends. Let's see how that plays out. This breaks down the trade-offs perfectly. On one side, you have Azure SQL. If your data is super structured and you absolutely need strong transactional consistency, think financial apps, CRMs, this is your go-to. It scales vertically, which just means you make the server bigger and more powerful. On the other side, you have Cosmos DB. If you're dealing with tons of unstructured data, need to spread it all over the globe with crazy low latency, and want to scale horizontally by just adding more servers, well, Cosmos DB is the clear winner. An architect has to ask those questions. Is this for one city or the whole world? Is the data structure fixed or is it going to change all the time? The answers point you to the right service. Let's tackle another one, another critical design choice, but this time in your application's architecture. So your microservices, they need to talk to each other, but without having to wait around for a direct response. How do you pick the right messaging service? Well, it often boils down to understanding the intent of the message. Is it a command or is it an event?
The difference here is subtle, but it is so powerful. Service bus is for commands. A command is a high-value message, something that expects an action, like process this order. It guarantees that message gets there and can even make sure they're processed in the right order. Event grid, on the other hand, is for events. An event is just a simple notification that something happened, like, hey, a new file was uploaded. It just broadcasts that fact to anyone who's listening. If you choose the wrong one, you can end up with a system that's either really unreliable or way too complex.
So we've built our foundation, we've built our application, now we have to protect it. Our third pillar, business continuity, is absolutely 100% non-negotiable. This is all about designing for high availability and disaster recovery. It's about building that safety net to make sure your solution can handle failures and keep the business running no matter what happens. The first critical term you've got to negotiate with the business is RTO, or Recovery Time Objective. And here's the secret. This isn't a tech metric, it's a business one. It answers the question right there on the screen. How quickly do we need to be back online? If your e-commerce site goes down, the business might say, we can only be down for 15 minutes max before we start losing serious cash. Well, there's your RTO. The second one is RPO, or Recovery Point Objective. This one is all about data loss. It answers the question, how much data can we possibly afford to lose? For that same e-commerce site, the business is going to say, we can't lose a single transaction, giving you an RPO of basically 0. But for maybe an internal report that only runs at night, an RPO of 24 hours might be totally fine. These two metrics, RTO and RPO, they are the two dials that will directly control the cost and the complexity of your entire solution. And here are the main tools in your toolbox to actually hit those RTO and RPO numbers. For high availability inside a single region, you're going to use things like load balancers and availability zones to protect against local failures. But for true disaster recovery between regions, Azure Site Recovery is your go-to workhorse. And of course, underpinning all of it is Azure Backup to protect the data itself. A great architect knows exactly how to mix and match these to build that resilient safety net. Okay, we've covered the what and the why. Let's switch gears and talk about the how. This last section is all about giving you a clear, actionable strategy to get ready for the exam and, more importantly, to really master these concepts for the real world. Here's a structured plan that gets your hands dirty. Seriously, don't just read about this stuff, build it. Start by actually booking the exam. Give yourself a deadline. Then, for each big area, build a lab that goes with it. Create a governance structure. Configure a real disaster recovery test. Build a hub-spoke network. This hands-on experience, that's what turns theory into an actual skill. Now for some hard-won advice straight from the field. First, be ready. The real exam is usually way more complex than the practice tests. The scenarios have a lot of layers. Second, pay super close attention to keywords. If you see the word premium in a service name, that's a huge hint that you probably need global capabilities. And finally, manage your time. Trust me on this one, you have to leave a solid 20 minutes at the end for the final case study. And here's the target. The magic number is 700 out of 1,000. It's a high bar, for sure, but with the right prep and a focus on design principles instead of just memorization, it is an absolutely achievable goal. So there you have it. We've walked through the entire blueprint for thinking like an Azure architect, from the right mindset and the core pillars, all the way to a practical plan for getting there. The only question left is the one on the screen. You have the blueprint. What are you going to build first? Thanks so much for watching.